Nobody in Philadelphia cleared a room faster than Kevin Drexler's name. The night he was carried through Mercy Cross Hospital's ambulance bay, two men in dark coats hauling him by the shoulders, his white dress shirt soaked through on the left side, his jaw set against pain the way concrete sets against weather. The emergency room emptied in under 4 minutes. A nurse found a phantom supply run on the second floor. The attending on call received a family emergency that no one at the desk could verify. The charge station cleared like water off a tilted tray, and by the time the double doors swung shut behind the dark coats, the bay held 3 unconscious patients who would not remember the night and 1 person who had chosen not to leave. Ines Cho pulled on a pair of exam gloves. "Bay 4, she said to the men in dark coats. "Then you leave my floor." They looked at each other. She didn't look at either of them and started cutting away the shirt. The wound was a single gunshot, high on the left side, clean exit, nothing vital compromised by what appeared to be genuinely poor aim on someone's part. He was conscious, which was information she filed as useful and potentially complicated. He had the build of a man accustomed to making rooms smaller just by entering them, and the expression of someone confronting the fact that this particular room did not respond to that quality. "Where did everyone go?" he said. Away, she pressed gauze to the wound and guided his hand to it. "Hold this." His hand came up without argument. She noted that too. "You know who I am, not a question." "I know you're bleeding on my table." She reached for the suture kit. "That's enough information for tonight." A pause. Then, with something close to curiosity, "You're not afraid of me?" Ines threaded the first suture. "I don't have room for it right now." She finished at 2:40 in the morning. The 2 men in dark coats had not returned. Kevin Drexler sat upright on the edge of the table in a borrowed hospital scrub top. She'd discarded the shirt because nothing that far gone was worth saving, and he watched her strip off her gloves and drop them in the hazmat bin with the quiet attention of a man who had not been in the same room as patients in a long time. "Name," he said. "Cho." "First name." She picked up the clipboard. "Not on your discharge paperwork." The almost law came again, closer to real this time. She handed him the instructions. "Keep the wound clean. Follow up in 72 hours. No strenuous activity." She said all of it knowing none of it would happen. Men like Kevin Drexler did not follow up. Men like him walked out of rooms and became the stories other people told in low voices. He took the paper and looked at it longer than necessary, which meant he wasn't reading it. He was deciding something. "You stayed," he said. "It's my floor." Everyone else didn't seem to think that mattered. Ines looked at him directly for the first time since he'd arrived. His eyes were dark and careful, and held something older than the rest of his face. Not grief exactly, but the particular exhaustion of someone who had survived things they hadn't planned to. "Congratulations," she said. "You found the one nurse in Philadelphia who's too tired to perform fear." She walked to the supply cart. Behind her, she heard him stand. Slowly, the way people moved when they'd decided not to let on that something hurt, and then the soft finality of the ambulance bay doors. On the counter near Bay 4, $200, folded once, set under the IV stand with a deliberateness that meant it was not an accident. Ines stared at it. Then she took it, because her electricity bill was due Thursday, and Dignity did not negotiate with Philadelphia Electric. The bus ride home was 35 minutes of the city blurring past wet glass, all orange streetlights and dark storefronts, and the particular solitude of 3 a.m. Philadelphia. She got off on Vine Street and climbed to the second floor of a building that smelled permanently of someone else's cooking, and a carpet that had given up years ago. Inside, her brother Bren was on the couch with his shoes on, and a chemistry textbook pressed face down on his chest like he'd fallen asleep mid-argument with it. He was 17 and had been tall for 6 months and hadn't yet made peace with it, all elbows and complicated silences. In sleep he looked younger than that, which was the only time she let herself see it. She lifted the textbook, a note on the cover orange and impossible to miss. "See me after class, Mr. Aldane." Ines closed her eyes. "Bren." He surfaced slowly. "You smell like antiseptic and overtime. You smell like someone avoiding Mr. Aldane." One eye opened. "Is that tonight's crime?" "It's this week's pattern." She sat on the arm of the couch because it was the least commitment she could manage. "He left a note." "He likes notes. It's his whole thing." "You failed the quiz." "I was present for the quiz." "Being present isn't the same as passing, and you know that." He pulled himself upright and looked at her with the particular expression of a 17-year-old who was right about something and had decided this was the wrong moment to say so. You work all night, you come home at 3 in the morning, and then you parent me. That's the arrangement. Mom would've. I know, she stood before he finished. She would have done it better. She went to the kitchen. The faucet dripped. 3 envelopes on the table, 2 from the hospital billing department and 1 from a collections agency she'd started letting go to voicemail. She pressed the thickest one flat with her palm. The number inside had stopped being a number. It had become a fixed condition, like the dripping faucet or the January draft through the window that didn't fully close. Bren shuffled to his room, his door closed softly, which was worse than a slam. Ian stayed at the counter until almost 4, listening to the building settle and the city quiet down and the faucet keep its patient, indifferent rhythm. When she finally slept, she dreamed of a man watching her snap on a pair of exam gloves with an expression she didn't yet have a word for. The knock came at 9 the next morning, 3 even taps, deliberate. Ines opened the door in yesterday's clothes with cold coffee in her hand. A woman stood in the hall, mid-50s, charcoal suit, the practiced composure of someone paid specifically to deliver news that powerful people preferred not to deliver themselves. Miss Cho, my name is Prale. I represent Drexler Holdings. I know what Drexler Holdings is. Then I'll be brief. Prale produced a folder, Operations Compliance and Patient Billing Audit Oversight at Drexler Medical Solutions. The position has been vacant in any meaningful sense for several months. $3,800 a week, health coverage for you and your brother, and a half-second pause, precise as a scalpel, a signing payment that covers the full outstanding balance of your mother's medical debt with Mercy Cross. Today, close of business. Ines was very still. The address is in the folder, Prale said. Monday at 8. If you don't come, we don't contact you again. She left. Ines stood with her back against the closed door, the folder in both hands. From behind Bren's door, who was that? Wrong address. You're a terrible liar for someone who gives people bad news for a living. She looked at the folder, then at the 3 envelopes on the table, then at the folder again. She sat down at the kitchen table and read it twice. Drexler Medical Solutions occupied the 6th floor of a glass building at Penn's Landing, neat and corporate and entirely unremarkable from the outside, which she'd spent Sunday deciding was probably intentional. It supplied billing services and medical equipment to 17 hospital networks across the region. The payroll was real, the incorporation was real, the compliance function, as best she could determine, had been real in theory and ornamental in practice. Monday morning, Cavan Drexler was already in the office when she arrived. He stood at the window with his right hand braced against the glass, and his left held fractionally away from his body. The unconscious adjustment of someone working around an injury they'd officially decided to stop acknowledging. Dark suit, not enough sleep, a coffee cup on the windowsill that hadn't been touched. He turned when he heard her. Cho. Mr. Drexler. She set her bag down. Your password is on a sticky note under the keyboard. I know. That's a security concern. Change it. I plan to. She looked at the desk. Invoices, vendor agreements, billing statements stacked in no discernible order, 3 pens that were out of ink, and a coffee ring so old it had become structural. Who was in this office before me? 3 people. What happened to them? 2 quit, 1 stopped appearing, and I didn't follow up. Did you read anything on this desk? His eyes moved to the window. I've been otherwise occupied. With what? Recovering from a gunshot wound, mostly. She found the keyboard, found the sticky note, changed the password to something that required actual effort, and got to work. Cavan watched her from near the window for 20 minutes without speaking, which she'd decided to treat as neutral rather than surveillance. Then he left and came back with a second coffee from somewhere, set it on her side of the desk without a word, returned to the window. She drank it because it was better than the office machine, and she needed the help. By noon, she'd found 4 duplicate payments. By 2, a vendor account receiving funds under a name that appeared in no state business registry. By the time the light outside had shifted into late afternoon gray, she had the thread. Same routing number, 2 different vendor names. First transaction dated 8 months and 11 days after a death she hadn't known about yet. She stood and carried the printout to where Cavan stood. He ended his call before she said a word. She laid the page on the windowsill beside the untouched coffee. Someone has been diverting payments from your hospital partners. Same routing account, different names, different amounts, all processed through an entity that doesn't exist at the address on file. She tapped the date on the first transaction. This started 8 months after your sister died. He didn't flinch. He went quiet in a way that changed the temperature of the room. They waited until you were distracted, Ines said. Kavan read every line twice. His jaw held tension. He was distributing carefully. How much? I can confirm 2.3 million so far. I need more records to find the rest. She met his eyes. And I need you to not do anything to the records room before I get there. He looked at her sharply. Then something in his expression settled. I wasn't going to. The version of you I met 11 days ago might have. A pause. That's fair. His eyes went to the harbor. Gray water, cranes in the distance, a cargo ship moving so slowly it seemed fixed in place. Katie ran the partner accounts, he said, quiet and plainly. She was the one who caught errors. She was the one who noticed patterns. She had a system that made sense to her and nobody else, and after she was gone, he stopped. Nobody touched the accounts because nobody understood them. I think that was probably the point. Ines said nothing. Some silences were the only thing that fit the space. After a long moment, get what you need. She got what she needed in 8 days. The name at the end of it was Doral Sen, operations manager, 6 years at the company, reliably present at every meeting, described twice in written reviews as detail-oriented, which was, she reflected, exactly the word a careful thief needed people to use. Not flashy, not ambitious, just reliable. The kind of man who built a fraud the way a slow leak builds water damage, patient, quiet, invisible until the ceiling came down. On the Wednesday, she finalized the accounting. Bren texted from the apartment that someone had knocked twice and left without speaking. She called him before she'd finished reading the message. Don't go near the windows. Ins. Kitchen or your room right now. What is happening? I'm handling it. Lock the door. Kavan appeared in the office doorway. She didn't know how he'd known. She'd stopped wondering how he knew things because the answer was always because men like him arrange for it. And she hadn't yet decided how she felt about that answer. My brother, she said. My people are 90 seconds out. He was already moving. Come with me. They reached the apartment in 11 minutes. 2 men she'd seen once before in the building's loading corridor were already in the stairwell. Bren opened the door before they reached it and stood in the frame in socks, and his worn-out hoodie, arms crossed, radiating the specific energy of someone who had been scared for 40 minutes, and converted every last ounce of it into confrontation. I'm fine, he said to Ines. I know. He looked at Cavan, assessed him the way kids who'd learned young to read a room assessed everything, quickly, without obvious motion, storing the results. You're why someone knocked on our door. Yes, Cavan said. Bren blinked. He'd braced for a longer answer. The single word seemed to cost him some of his prepared hostility. You could have warned her. I underestimated how fast Sen would move. I won't again. Bren looked at Ines. She could see the question, are you done? And she could see that he already knew her answer and hated it, and was going to accept it because he was, despite everything, his mother's son. You're a lot of trouble, Bren said to Kavan. I know. She already has enough. I know that too. Bren looked at him for another long moment, then, there's leftover rice in the fridge if you're hungry. It's probably bad. Don't tell her I said that. Ines rubbed both hands over her face. Cavan stood in the hallway with the expression of a man encountering a social situation for which none of his usual frameworks applied. Thank you, he said. Bren went back inside. The door stayed open, which was the closest thing to an invitation he was going to offer. The meeting at Drexler Holdings happened 2 days later. Ines built the case. She organized the evidence in order. Shell accounts first, false vendor names second, routing numbers third, Doral Sen's authorization signatures on every flagged transaction last. She wrote the summary on the front page in language that assumed nothing and proved everything, because she had learned that men with power made decisions from the first sheet and used the rest to feel certain. Then she stood in the hallway while Cavan went in alone. They had argued about that part. She'd said she should present the case she'd built. He'd said Sen had eyes on the guest list, and that walking her into the room would tell him exactly how close they'd gotten before the first word was spoken. She'd told him that was a reasonable strategic point, and she still didn't like it. He'd told her he heard her. She stood in the hallway for 40 minutes holding a paper coffee cup she'd been gripping too hard. Once voices rose on the other side of the door, one unfamiliar and defensive. Then Kavan's voice, flat and level, the kind of flat and level that meant the conversation was already finished and he was allowing the other person to conclude it out of courtesy. Then quiet. The door opened. Kavan came out first, hands at his sides. She checked them automatically, no visible damage. Doral Sen came out after him between two men who materialized from somewhere she hadn't tracked. Sen looked at her. She watched him understand. The audit, the routing numbers, the shell addresses, the woman in the hallway with a tote bag and a paper coffee cup. And she watched him calculate what he could and couldn't do about it from this position. And she watched the calculation arrive at nothing. He was escorted out through the side door. Kavan stood in the hallway and looked at his right hand. He'd split 2 knuckles on something she decided not to ask about. He held the hand at his side with the specific stillness of a man who was aware of her noticing and had chosen to let her. "No fists first," she said. "No fists first." She exhaled. How close was it? Closer than I'd have liked. His jaw held the last of something, but I had a reason. She took the first aid kit from her bag. She'd started carrying one specifically for him after the 3rd week, and held out her hand. He extended his without argument, which she noticed had become a pattern they'd both stopped remarking on. She cleaned the knuckles and pressed the bandage flat. He watched her work the way he watched everything now, closely, without trying to direct it. "Katie would have liked you," he said. Enos didn't look up. Why? She had no patience for people who performed their emotions. She said it was the most exhausting thing about most people. A pause. She would have said, "You don't perform anything." Ince smoothed the last strip of tape and held his hand still for a moment. The scarring on his knuckles was old and new both. A long record of believing that force was the first and fastest tool. She let go. She was right about the accounts, Innes said. She just needed 1 more week. Kavan looked at the window. She always needed 1 more week. I never stopped telling her to hurry. He said it like something he'd stopped trying to put down. I never gave her the week. You gave her this one. He looked back at her. The careful armor he wore had a door in it she hadn't seen 3 weeks ago. I had help. Innes reached into her bag and pulled on a fresh pair of exam gloves. Muscle memory, the habit of someone who had worked 12-hour shifts for 4 years and always needed her hands to be ready. She looked at them in her hands. "I'm staying," she said, in the role. Kavan went very still. "On conditions." She looked up. "Bren gets the tutor your sister knew about, or someone similar. The partner accounts get a real compliance audit every quarter, not just when something breaks, and if you walk into a situation that requires fists instead of paperwork, you tell me before you're bleeding in my bay." A long pause. "Those are specific conditions," he said. "I'm a specific person." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the Philadelphia waterfront was gray and moving and indifferent to everything happening inside the glass building above it. Then he nodded once. She peeled off the exam gloves and set them on the window ledge, pushed one toward him. He looked at it, then at her. She waited. Kavan Drexler, who had not taken direction in a room from anyone in longer than either of them could calculate, reached out and picked up the glove, held it in his scarred, newly bandaged hand. He didn't put it on. He just held it, the way people held something when they were learning its weight. "Same time tomorrow?" he said. "Your vendor accounts don't audit themselves." "No." The almost smile arrived, slow and unguarded, nothing performed about it. "I'm learning that." They rode the elevator down together. They walked out into the cold November afternoon together. At the bottom of the steps, she stopped. Bren had texted, "Tutor sounds fake, I'll try it, don't make it a thing." She showed Kavan the message. He read it and said nothing. But the almost smile was back, and it arrived faster this time. "He'll be fine," she said. "I know." Kavan looked out at the harbor. "I was a disaster at 17. There's a lot of room between disaster and fine." "Were you actually?" "I took my father's car and didn't bring it back for 3 days because I couldn't explain where it had been." "Where had it been?" "The Delaware River." Ian stopped walking. "You drove a car into the Delaware River." "Not intentionally." "How does that happen unintentionally?" "Very fast." She laughed, arrived without warning, real and unguarded, and she saw the moment it landed on him, saw something in his face go still, in the particular way things went still when they had been waiting longer than they'd admitted. He looked at her for a long moment. "Inez," he said, her first name the first time. She looked back at him. The harbor was cold behind him, and the city moved around them in its ordinary, indifferent way. She had stayed on her floor because it was her floor. She had followed the routing numbers because numbers always led somewhere. She had handed him gauze in a cleared-out emergency bay, the way she handed everyone something in the moment that mattered. Not mercy, exactly, but the practical shape of it. She looked at him, holding the glove in his bandaged hand. "Try not to bleed on anything important tonight," she said. The smile arrived fully then, real and slow and nothing performed about it, the kind of smile that made him look younger and more dangerous for an entirely different reason. "I'll do my best," Kevin Drexler said. And for the first time since the ambulance bay, Enos Cho believed him.